Well, good evening, everyone. Oh, you can do better than that. Good evening. It is a great night as we come together. We do want to welcome you to Peace United Church of Christ. I'm Pastor Paul Bauck. I'm the lead pastor here at Peace, and it's just such a great and thrilling night to have John with us. Many of us have been reading through his book and material and all the wonderful blogs and Facebook posts and everything else you do. It's just exciting to have you here, so we do want to welcome you. Just some housekeeping items we want to let you know about. First and foremost, the most important thing tonight, where the bathrooms are. If you go out and down the hall to the right, you'll find several, if you keep on going down the steps, if those are full, we have several more down at the bottom of the steps as well, so you're welcome to go there and do that. Most importantly, as we come together, very seriously, I do want to thank our staff for all their work on helping putting this weekend together, and our wonderful leadership team that's worked very hard and diligently. We've been pursuing this for about almost 2 years, I think, when we began talking about bringing John here and what it would mean for our community around us, because we really believe that our outreach goes beyond these walls. We are one community, and to have John's message and our presence is just so powerful. We do want to just let you know that as you came in, you may have seen some cardboard tables. Our children have been putting together those tables over the last several weeks, building them from scratch. They've been creating their own bigger table. And we'd like everybody to participate in decorating those. There's markers out there and there's stickers, all sorts of fun stuff. So if you have a message you would like to share, a message of love and hope and peace for this world, please write it on those tables. There are your tables and our tables to share together. So please do that as well. As I mentioned, we had a wonderful leadership team that put this together, and I want to just introduce the instigator of all this. And she has been the driver for this. She has been working side by side with us all the way along. So if we can just give thanks for Tanya Ely as she comes forward tonight.
Thank you all for coming tonight. This has been a labor of love for me for the last about 2 years, pretty much, and I'm very, very excited, and welcome to everyone, and thank you all for coming. A few people I'd like to thank is, first of all, John for coming and braving the weather. Very important. I told him to bring his parka. So, and I'd also like to thank our church leadership in making this all happen. The weekend, tonight's not the only night, so we have a few more days ahead of us. And I'd like to shout out to Lydia, wherever she's at. There she is. And Debbie as well for running the sound, and for Claire up front. And we have Annie and Rachel at the front end. And if I've forgotten anybody, I'm sorry. Ben, thank you wherever you are for being part of it. So I have the honor tonight of introducing John Pavlovitz. Many of you are here tonight because you are familiar with John's work. But if you haven't yet heard him, you will be so glad you came. John is a Christian pastor and author who has become well known as a progressive Christian thinker, writer, and speaker. His blog, Stuff That Needs to Be Said, has been called provocative, but I would call it perfectly timid. Here at Peace, we are embarked on a journey, reading and discussing John's book, A Bigger Table, which challenges all of us to make the table we share more inclusive, to offer, in John's words, lavish acceptance. I couldn't be more excited to introduce John Pavlovitz.
Let me try that. There we go. Well, good evening. I am just so thrilled. I'm going to move a little bit closer to you, so I'm going to move these while I'm talking. And thank you for rolling out the red carpet, even if it is half frozen. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina this morning, and it was 80 degrees. So I'm feeling a little disoriented. But I did grow up in Syracuse, New York, so this is like muscle memory, right? Shivering. So can everyone see me from here? You comfortable with that? I wanted to be a little bit closer, so great. Thank you. I am really thrilled to be here, and we're going to have the whole weekend together. If you have time, we're going to be here tomorrow digging deeper into how to avoid compassion fatigue or how to help yourself if you already have it. And I'm going to be meeting with students tomorrow evening, and then Sunday morning we'll be here for services. So it's just so great to be with you. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you exist. You know, I'm so glad that you're not just bots on my social media profile. You know, doing the work that I do, it can be very isolating. I'm there in Raleigh, and I'm sitting there writing these words. I put these words out into the world, and I have the data that tells me that people are reading the writing, right? So intellectually, I understand that, but it can be really difficult on many days to connect that data to flesh and blood human beings. And so when I get to walk into a room and see your faces, it is just such an encouragement to me. So thank you for being here tonight. Tonight is exciting, right? Now, it's not exciting because I'm here, right? My wife would tell you that. It's just John. It's exciting because we get to gather together and share the same space and time. We get to look in one another's eyes, and we get to talk about the deepest contents of our hearts. And you may not really know why you're here, right? As you walked in here, I thought that. Why are they here? It's sub-zero. When it's sub-zero, I wouldn't want to come and see me. And so I look at your faces, and I start to imagine what your story is, and I wonder why you're here. And I wanted to start off and ask you if a couple of you would just tell us why you're here tonight. Just put your hand up and just tell us why you're here. Yes, in the back. Thank you. Why are you here tonight? Trying to figure out how to still be a Christian. Yes. Thank you. Why are you here? Yes. Struggling to make the church real. Thank you. Yes. Okay, you don't know how much more of this current situation in America you can take. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and somebody had the nerve. Some Facebook troll said, "Oh, John, you must be really struggling. You're going to Rochester." I said, how dare you? Do you know I want to be somewhere warmer than Canada, so that's why I came here. I don't know why you're here. You may have read some of the writing. You may, be a part of this local faith community. You may be an older person, a fan of Saturday Night Live, and you thought you were here to see John Lovitz, right? But you're not. I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm here. Not just why I'm here tonight, but why I do the work I do. How I found myself where I have. You see, I found myself being a very divisive figure talking about faith and politics, and that was not the plan. If you're here tonight and you dream of being a divisive figure talking about faith and politics, you need prayer and a better plan, right? So, but I'm here tonight because I've been a pastor in the local church for the past 23 years. And doing this work, I've seen the beauty of the church. I've seen so many things as a pastor that have been life-giving, that have been beautiful, that have affirmed my faith in humanity, right? And but as a pastor, I've also seen many things in the local church that I've grieved, things that I've mourned over in my faith community and the church at large. And it seems like more and more I'm finding reason to grieve what the church is becoming. And I want people to hear a different expression of the Christian faith in the world than the one that they're used to hearing. I'm here because I believe every single person has the same inherent worth, and because it seems like there are so many people leading our government and leading our churches that still don't understand that. And so I want to stand alongside those who are lovers of all people. I think that's why you're here. I'm here because I've been a Christian for most of my life. I would tell you I'm still a Christian today, but I have more and more difficulty saying that because I know what that word now associates me with in the minds of so many people, right? I know what they think of when they hear Christian. And I'm here to be an expectation-defying Christian. I want people to meet me and to hear me and to say, I didn't think people who follow Jesus were like you. I want people to be surprised with compassion and mercy and love. And I'm here because this is, if I'm honest with you, and I'm going to be honest with you tonight, this is the most toxic, most diversity-resistant, most compassionless movement I've seen in our country in my lifetime. And I believe that silence in the presence of it is participation in it. And I'm not the quiet type, and I sense that many of you are not either. I'm here because life is heavy and it's difficult on its best days, right? Like days when everything goes right, when you open up the refrigerator door and there's still milk left. If you have middle schoolers, you understand. On days when you have a really good hair day or lack of hair day, right? Days when you feel comfortable in your own skin. Days when you hit all the green lights, even when everything breaks just right. Life is heavy and it's difficult. And I believe that leadership in the church and leadership in the government shouldn't pile burdens on already burdened people. And I want to be a source of lightness in the world. I want people to feel something has been lifted from them because of my time here on the planet. I think that's why you're here. Now, we get to speak together today. It's so amazing. You know why? Because you and I have had a strange relationship up until this point. It's been very one-sided, right? I write words. I put those words out into the world. Those words become the line around which people stand to argue with one another. But you read those words, and so we only engage through the written word. And you know how the written word is fraught with difficulty, right? You ever try sharing the Bible with people, talking about the Bible, right? You know that the written word is fraught with difficulty when you're having a text conversation and it goes sideways. Like I do with my son, and I'm saying, are we arguing here or are we having fun? I can't tell anymore. Or you know how you have a thread, an email thread at work, and two people start disagreeing and they start to solve that disagreement with more words, and you see how terribly things go. So things can really go wrong when we're just talking about the written word, and we have a chance to actually, I was at a conference not long ago, and I gave my presentation, and this man came up to me afterward, and he said, John, I've been reading your blog for a while. And I said, thank you. And he said, yeah, after hearing you today, I don't think you're as much of a jerk as I thought you were from your writing, right? That was Pastor Paul, which was terrible, very rude. But I'm going to tell you some stories tonight. I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story tonight. I'm hoping that you can find some of your story in it. And then I want to hear your story. I'm going to tell you how I became a jerk blogger, how I became a subversive pastor. And tonight what I'm hoping is this. I'm hoping we're not going to all agree. We may not agree on everything theologically. We may not agree on everything politically. I'm hoping that that'll be the case, because if we all agree on everything politically and theologically, the table is still far too small in this room. But I'm hoping we can agree philosophically, that we can say every human being has deep meaning and deep beauty, and we want to respect that. And if we can start there, we'll work the other stuff out. So a little bit about me, if you don't know. I'm going to ask you to walk with me through a little bit of my story. I did not start off wanting to be a polarizing public figure. I did not even want to be a pastor. I grew up in Syracuse, New York, in a fairly traditional Italian Roman Catholic family. Means I was raised on gluten and guilt, right? There's a lot of pasta, a lot of repentance in here. And, many years later, I still have a really healthy appetite for both. And I grew up in Syracuse, and I had two really good starting stories. I had the story of a family who was for me. The people who raised me told me I could do anything and be anything, and they let me know that they were in my corner. And not everyone in this room had that story. You have not all had the story of a family who was for you, but I did. And I also had a God story. And in my God story growing up, God was and God was good, and this God was massive and made everything and yet knew me intimately and loved me completely. It was, I believe, still is a true and beautiful story. And so here I was. I had these two great stories of a family who was for me, of a God who loved me, and yet I inherited a lot of false stories too. I inherited false stories about people of color. I inherited false stories about Muslims. I inherited false stories about gay people. I inherited false stories about poor people. And in all those false stories that I inherited, they weren't the result of adults around me trying to mislead me. It's just that the adults who were raising me were only around people who looked and thought and believed and worshiped and loved the way that they did. And you know that if you're only around people who look and talk and think and believe and worship the way that you do, your table's going to naturally be small. And you're going to rely on false stories for people who don't look and talk and think and believe and worship and love the way that you do. So there I was. I had these two great stories, and yet all these false stories. And if I had stayed there in Syracuse, New York, I probably would have been a decent human being. I probably would have been productive. I probably would have done good work in the world, but I would have had far too small a table for the God I said I believed in. And God gave me a gift. God gave me a gift in the city of Philadelphia. Anyone here from Philadelphia? One person. The rest of you are going, why would he say that? I know those Eagles fans. They're terrible. Philadelphia was a gift to me, and I'll explain it this way. I got a scholarship to study graphic design and illustration at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. You know how when you go to a carnival, there's a game, and it's got a group of fish in little fish bowls, and you have a ping pong ball. And you try to toss the ping pong ball in, and if you get it into one of the fish bowls, you get to take home a fish. But you know, in that little Ziploc baggie, if you take your fish home and put it into an aquarium right away, the system shock will overwhelm him and you'll have a dead fish. You have to ease him in. Well, when I arrived at Philadelphia, it was like I was dropped from 30,000 feet into the heart of the city of brotherly love. And there I saw things I'd never seen. I was around diversity that I'd never been a part of. And I was immersed in poverty that I never really understood existed. And I saw this diversity and I experienced this poverty not as theological discussions, not as political debates, not as intellectual exercises. I saw these things as flesh and blood human beings with names and faces and stories. And those stories were real stories, and those stories started to change me. And I remember the first time I went home on Thanksgiving break, my first semester. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you have something change in your life. You see something or you experience something, and you want to share it with people who haven't seen what you've seen and don't know what you know, right? And you go in and you're all excited, and they can't figure out why you're so excited. And what I did was I came home and I was talking to my father on Thanksgiving break. My father was a little bit more conservative than I am. And we started getting into a heated conversation, as Italians do. And the topic was poor people and why they're poor, let's say. And my dad started talking, and I thought, this is the moment. This is the moment when I'm going to share all the wisdom I've acquired over the past 2 months. And he hadn't seen what I had seen, and he didn't know what I knew. And so what I did was I bulldozed him with my revelation. I began just telling him all this stuff I've experienced. And he, as I was talking, he began to shake his head and smile. If you're trying to convince someone of something and they shake their heads and smile, you've lost. And my dad said, oh, John, you've turned into a real bleeding heart. And I just shot back, I'd rather have a bleeding heart than a dead one, Dad. And the fact that I'm here today, right, the fact that I'm still alive with you today means that my father was far more compassionate than I gave him credit for, right? But those stories were really changing me. I say that during that time, God rewrote my false stories and expanded my table and prepared me to be a pastor. But see, this was 10 years before I ever thought I would be in that position. And see, at the time, I was what you would call a hopeful agnostic. I was just saying, my worldview was, I really hope this works out in the end, but I don't know how. So it was like 10 years after this moment, my wife and I had gotten married in this little Methodist chapel, probably about a quarter of the size of this room, and we're sitting there in a church service, and the church service ends, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking very spiritual thoughts, like, where are we going to eat today for lunch? Or I'm thinking, I hope the Eagles' offensive line can handle the Giants' defensive pressure, right? And this woman taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and she says, John, I've been thinking about you and praying about you, and I think you would make the best youth leader. I smiled and thought to myself, I know you. You're the current youth leader, right? She had paid her debt to society. She had done her time, and she was going to get out on good behavior, and she needed a succor, a victim, a minister of the Lord. And so she said, you want to come and hang out with some teenagers tonight at our youth meeting? And I thought, well, sure, what could that change about the complete trajectory of my life, right? And I said, sure. And you know how there are those yeses in your life that you say, and they're pivot point moments when everything changes in your life, and you had no idea with that one yes that everything was going to change because it's disguised as an ordinary moment, right? But if you knew the gravity of the situation, you would run screaming or fall on your knees because something was about to change. And that's what happened. I remember that Sunday night, I walked down the stairs, there's like this moldy church basement with Civil War era furniture and leaky bean bags, because you need those in a youth group room. And there's like 6 or 7 kids, the Bad News Bears looking kids, drooling and things like that. And something happened. I realized in that first couple of hours and the days that followed, I had a heart for working with teenagers. I loved adolescence, like that turbulent time of people's lives. I wanted to be present for that. And it was like a storm chaser. Like, that looks horrible, let's go there. And so I just loved working with middle school and high school students, and then also something happened as I started to teach them about a faith that I didn't have. My faith grew. I got surprised by God, and my faith started to grow, and finally I was given more and more time to this ministry. It started to grow, and they said, John, do you want to, we'll give you a part-time job at the church. And I said, whoa, that's great. So I did that, and I'm working my full-time job, and then they said, John, listen, things are going really well. A couple months later, we want to offer you a full-time position. And so I left my career. That was plan A. That was what I was supposed to do, right? That was the thing that Mom and Dad were happy with. They understood that. And so I started working full-time in the church as a pastor. And just our first son, Noah, was born 3 months later. And Noah was born, and a church offered me a job to work down in Charlotte, North Carolina, to go to this mega church. And my son was only 3 months old at the time. I don't know if you understand how Italian families work, but they don't like when you take the grandbabies away, right? It's not funny. There were like guys like named Vito going, don't do it, don't take him away. And I said to my wife, okay, here's the deal. She came home, and I was all like worn out, and I said, okay, so here's the deal. Our families are all here. We know how things are going. I already left my full-time job, but yet I'm thinking about taking this job all the way down in Charlotte where we have no family. It's just so risky, but I really feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And she said, I think we should go. I said, it's that easy? I had like a whole PowerPoint presentation prepared. But she's much braver than I am. Her name's Jen. And so we go down, and we're working in a mega church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it's 2005. And friends, if you have seen me then, 2005, I was super Christian mega pastor man. Our church had 2,000 people on a Sunday, and our youth group was hundreds of kids. And I was speaking to these massive groups of people, and we were doing beautiful work in the city. The budget for our youth program was more than the budget for most churches, right? I was so spoiled. I could do anything creatively that I wanted. I was writing original music for the church. We were recording it, and the church was singing it. Everything was going well, and I loved it. I did. It was beautiful. It was great. It was one of the most powerful seasons of my life, and it worked for me until it didn't work anymore. Have you ever had something in your life that worked and then it didn't work for you anymore? You get older, that happens a lot, but that's a whole other story. See, if I was super Christian mega pastor man right at this time, I experienced 2 pieces of kryptonite. I want to share them with you because I know you've experienced them. The first piece of kryptonite was I started to have theological questions. Questions about our theology toward the LGBTQ community. I started to have questions about the reality of eternal damnation with a loving God. I started to have questions about why there were no female pastors in our church, right? And all these theological questions, you've had some of those, right? You've had those conflicts with your religious tradition, but it's one thing to experience those as a pew sitter, as a chair sitter, as a civilian Christian, but to be up here and to be expected to say with complete authority every Sunday, this is what God says, this is who God is, and this is how you're to respond based on what that God says. And there was a conflict between the person I felt called to be the more I followed Jesus and the pastor that I was expected to be. There were the things I felt like I needed to say and then what I had to say standing before people. And there was a pulling, a tension. There was organized religion in my very disorganized faith. But I could talk around it. I could preach around it. I could not deal with the theological questions. That was okay. I could keep that under wraps. But I started to have another kryptonite experience, and it was that I looked back 10 years after having been in Philadelphia and realized I had no diversity in my life anymore. That when I got to Charlotte, I was welcomed by my Christian community. They said, we're your Christian community. Here's your Christian dry cleaner. Here's your Christian dog washer, right? Here's your Christian car salesman. Here's your Christian bakery where we do wedding cakes, right like that. They just tell you everything, and all of a sudden I realized I was only around Christians from my church. Only around Christians from my church who believed what I believe. And only Christians from my church who believe what I believe, who I liked, which was such a small list, right? And I started to lament the fact that I was a better person before I was a pastor. That back in Philadelphia, that I had people around me, and I stopped listening to those voices. I didn't have gay people around me. I didn't have Muslims around me. I didn't have a diverse worldview around me. It was just the people from my church. So there I was. I had these two kryptonite moments, right? I had these theological questions, and I had the stories of marginalized, vulnerable people who I wasn't listening to anymore. And I started to listen to their stories again. I started to place myself out of that Christian bubble intentionally. But I had to decide, what am I going to do as a pastor in a megachurch with these theological questions? I could put them aside, or I could lean into them. I could ask them openly. I could write about them. I could talk about the doubts. And with these stories of marginalized people, I could refuse to hear what they were saying to me. Because what they were saying to me was, John, this church that you're a part of, it doesn't seem like it's just out to exclude me, but it seems to actually want to damage me. And I could take those stories and I could put them aside and just do the business of church. Or I could lean into those stories, talk about those stories with my people, and I could ask why the church is so toxic. So I chose to lean into both of those things. So I got offered to work at a church in Raleigh, and just 5 months into my time there, I heard God calling me to leave that church. Came in the form of my pastor's voice saying, you're fired. I'd like to say it was in my quiet time, in a voice that sounded like Morgan Freeman. But it was a Thursday afternoon at a Starbucks with a group of strangers hearing my life fall apart. And it was devastating for me because I was, my late 30s at the time. I hadn't lost a job before. So I'd never been fired. But it was more than that. It was that as a pastor, that was my heart. That was my identity, that I cared for people, that I wanted to walk with them through life. I wanted to share all the joys and sorrows of being human. And I didn't have that anymore. And it was worse than that. It was my whole idea of God, because I had to deal with God. I know people suffered in the Bible, but God, I was working for you. You got me fired, and I was just completely devastated for like 2 hours. Like if you see me that Thursday afternoon, you would have been like, keep an eye on him, right? He's not well. Because I remember having this moment where I was in tears, and I thought, for the first time in 17 years, I don't have a local community to be part of. I don't have a group of people to pastor. And then something happened. I started to realize that news with joy. Because something said, John, you know what? For the first time in 17 years, you don't have a local church. It's Sunday. You don't even have to go. You could stay in bed all day. And I started to realize I'd been given a gift. My termination allowed me now. I could ask anything and I could say everything. And when you can ask anything and say everything in regards to your relationships or your identity or your career or with your family, when you can ask anything and say everything, you never want to give that up again, right? And so I started asking those questions. Did I still want to be a pastor? Did I still want to be a Christian? Did I still want to work in the church? And if I was going to do any of those things, how was it going to be different now, knowing the freedom that I feel in this? So I went back. I went back to my tradition. I went back to Jesus' table ministry. All the stories in the Bible of Jesus gathering with people over a meal, and he used the meal as a way to let people know that they were seen and heard and loved and respected. And as I looked at all those meal stories of Jesus, I saw the diversity of his guest list. He dined with priest and with prostitute. He dined with the religious elite and the street rabble, right? Jesus dined with his disciples, and he dined with his adversaries. And I don't know about you, but right now I'm in no hurry to dine with my adversaries. I will have coffee with my adversaries. Because coffee, we can just put a lid on and leave, right? But this is what Jesus did. And because Jesus' guest list was so diverse, he experienced turbulence. Because the religious people were looking at him and saying, Jesus, why do you eat with the people of the street, the morally impure people? And those people of the street had to be saying, Jesus, why do you dine with our oppressors? Why do you eat with the people who do damage to us? There's a story that all the four biographers of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, share. If you don't know it, I'm going to give it to you in 90 seconds. Jesus is on a hillside, and he's preaching. And like most preachers, he's gone long, right? Sorry, Pastor Paul, I've been hearing stories. And his students come up and they say, Jesus, listen, you've been going on now. It's getting late. It's Sunday. Chick-fil-A's closed. No one's going to be able to eat anyway. And these people are really hungry. And Jesus says, oh, listen. Then you feed them. They start to scramble. They don't know what to do. And Jesus says, just tell me what you have. And they collect some things. And the story says they collect some bread and some fish. And then Jesus, in the story, blesses it and he gives thanks. And then he feeds a multitude. Oh, we can talk about that story. We can talk about it as a house story. And if we talk about it as a house story, we're going to be here all night. Because the mechanism of the miracle is not the point. If we read this story as a who and a why story, the who and a what and a why. Jesus is the who. And the what is that Jesus feeds people. And the why is because they're hungry. See, what's revelatory in that story and what changed me was what happens in that story is not as important as what doesn't happen. There's no offering taken. There's no spiritual gifts assessment tests. There's no theological test they need to go through. There's no comparing of dating history or sexuality or voting history. That no one has to prove they're worthy to be fed. Their hunger and Jesus' compassion for them makes them worthy. And this is what I wanted to be part of. This is the bigger table that I wanted to begin to build. I told you I went back to Jesus' tradition, right? Jesus' table ministry, but I went back to my own. See, I grew up in an Italian family, and we had a house growing up, but we didn't need the house. The house was just an expensive, elaborate covering for the kitchen. Right? The kitchen was where we became a family. Around that table, I had my spot. And around that table, we talked, and we laughed, and we gossiped, and we entertained, and we argued, and we ate, and we ate, and we ate, right? But I remember the strongest feelings of belonging around that table because I had my place. And I think back on those moments at that table, the ordinary days, and they're the most beautiful memories that I have. But you know what was even really great was on holidays, special days, we'd move on up to the dining room, right? And we'd invite more people. We'd have a bigger table. And then when the days got really special, my father would actually do construction. He would go out into the garage, and he'd bring back this big piece of wood, this rectangular piece of wood, and he'd say, pull either end of the table open, and we'd slide the table open. He'd put that piece of wood in, and we'd add more chairs. We'd literally expand the table to welcome more people. And I decided that this is the only kind of church that I want to be a part of. This is the only religious movement that matters to me. It's emulating the heart of Jesus that feeds people because they're hungry, no matter who they are and why they're hungry. And a church that will always say, who is not yet represented here? Who is not yet being heard? Because that's who needs to be here. So that bigger table, it's built on things like radical hospitality, which is like the Italian mother's welcome, right? When you're smothered with food and affection until you can take no more. And when you can take no more, we give you a doggy bag so you can take more, right? Radical hospitality it just means we celebrate people. It means that, see, you know when you're in a place when you're celebrated, right? And you know when you're in a place when you're just tolerated. And you know when you're in a place where you're not wanted, right? And whether you're celebrated or tolerated or not wanted, no one has to tell you with words, do they? You just know. I spent some time in Nairobi. I got to serve at an orphanage there. And I remember the first day we got there, and lining the road were all the children who lived there. And they had the best clothes on that they had, and they had flowers and musical instruments. And we came in, and they just were singing along the road. And I started to cry because I thought, these kids have nothing, and yet they're making me somehow feel special. They're making me feel like I matter, right? And what it would be like if we had churches that could sing people in. What if we let people know that they were celebrated? That's what radical hospitality is to me. Total authenticity is the other part of this table. Total authenticity means there are no deal breakers in you to be in my presence. Doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe, what you've done, what you haven't done, what you're sure of, what you're not sure of. What would it be like if we had communities where people could say, there is nothing I can share that will put me to the periphery of that community or push me out of that community? Because we say we want total authenticity, but what we want is we want just enough so that we feel comfortable with people, right? The third is true diversity. True diversity means a diversity that makes you uncomfortable. Because what we usually have in the church is sanitized diversity. It's diversity, yes, but it's usually the diversity that a pastor might be comfortable with, or a church council, or maybe the people already in the church. But once someone is too messy, or too loud, or too right, or too left, or too needy, then we don't really have a place for them. And so, can we have a community that says, when we say come as you are, we actually want you to come as you are, not as we desire you to be. And the fourth leg of this table is agenda-free relationship. And here, this is all that means is, I'm going to spend life with you without trying to change or fix or save or renovate you. I'm just going to be in your presence and learn from your story, right? And that's so hard for a lot of Christians. Because I grew up in a Christianity where I had to have an agenda. I had to save you from hell, right? If you want to save someone from hell, that's a beautiful impulse if you believe that. But often our relationships with people can be dishonest. They cannot be built on actual truth. So, this is what I would have said to you before I wrote the book, A Bigger Table. This is what I would have said to you maybe even a year ago. But I need to tell you truth in a way that I don't like telling you, but I'm going to tell you. See, I wrote this book, A Bigger Table, in 2015. If you could have seen me then. I mean, I was optimistic. I was effervescent. I think I looked like a young Brad Pitt. I don't know what happened, right? But I wrote this book, and I deeply believed it in the idea of the bigger table, that we can create spiritual community with disparate people where they all feel welcome. The problem was, as I started to write this book, and just as it was being published, we had a presidential campaign, and then we had an election, and now we've had a presidency, and I'm faced with a problem that I'm not sure I want the table to be as big as I always said I wanted it to be. See, we need to acknowledge the orange elephant in the room. We need to be honest. Someone said to me, John, the churches where you're going to speak, like the one in Rochester, you're just preaching to the choir. And I said, I don't know how many choirs you've met, but they all need some preaching to. And this is the preaching that I think we might need, choir. I am now faced with the reality that the bigger table, the greatest barrier to a fully big table may be me. Because I'm looking at some people and I'm deciding, I don't know if I want to dine with them. I don't know if I want proximity to them. I don't know if I want to give them the satisfaction of that relationship. I'm facing my own hypocrisy. I'm facing my own fraudulence. I'm facing my own inconsistency. And I want to name that, right? Because it's real. Because I know what I felt Jesus was calling me to. And now I know the reality of the America that I feel like I'm living in. And I'm having a hard time making sense of that. Because see, this Jesus, he's rather inconvenient. I've always believed a bigger table was not only possible but necessary. I think it's more necessary than ever. The problem is, I know there are more barriers to it right now. I know that there is an ugly, hateful, exclusionary Christianity that has the microphone, and I know now I need to figure out how to keep speaking into that. That we need to be doing this work of table building even while we call out injustices that are happening. That's the beauty of what Jesus did. Was he had people he opposed. He had people he spoke hard truth to. He had people he disagreed with and defended others against them. But he never lost the humanity of the people across from him. I think that's a challenge for us. I want to stop for a moment. And in our church, we have something called What Are You Thinking? It's really revolutionary. I ask you what you're thinking. We've got microphones, I think, correct? Yes. They're going to, oh, thank you. All right, so I want you to, if there's something you're thinking about, something you're struggling with, something that you're excited by, I want you just to share it. This is our chance to actually have conversation here. I've got more stuff I want to share, but I thought it'd be a good spot. Right down here? Mike, right down here, Paul. Thank you. I hope you have a Fitbit on. I want to see how many calories you burn doing this. Thank you.
You're talking about open tables. There's one table Jesus kicked over, literally whooped ass. And they were people that were trying to keep people from God's connection.
That's right.
He got upset with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're not a reader of the Bible, or you have and you sometimes do, read Matthew chapter 23. It's basically a whole chapter of Jesus railing into a group of religious people who are taking their power and using it and leveraging it against people to do them incredible harm. And Jesus is saying some really harsh words in there, right? These Pharisees that Jesus is speaking against, they would be right to say, Jesus, that's harsh. But see, Jesus could say those things and they were still redemptive. He could call out hypocrisy. He could call out injustice because he was not motivated to damage other people. He was motivated with compassion for people who were being hurt. So we don't have to shy away from really confronting things that we see that are horrible, and we can do them without betraying our faith convictions, right? We just have to understand that our intention has to be to defend someone else's humanity, not to take away someone's humanity. Thank you for that. What's on your mind? What are you thinking of? Could be related to what I've talked about or not at all. It could be questions about the country, faith, over there.
Here you go. Thanks. So why do I have to sit next to somebody who's toxic to me at the table?
Do you? You don't. Here's one of the questions people ask me is, for example, they'll say, well, why am I going to go to the table with someone who was going to do me harm, someone who's not seeing my humanity? And a couple things I'll say on that the idea of the bigger table, I've had people say to me recently, hey, John, you say you want this big table, and yet here's my politics. Am I still welcome at your table? And I'll tell them, the table is not bigger because you can do or say anything about anyone when you get there. The table is bigger because everyone's voice is heard and valued, right? Everyone's humanity is respected, but that's usually going to make me yield to people who have not yet been seen and respected, right? So I have to realize if I bring a 16-year-old transgender teenager and a white 60-year-old Southern Baptist guy to the table, it's a much greater ask of her, right? I have to respect that because her humanity is in question from the other. So I tell people who are of one political persuasion, when they ask me that, I said, you can come to the table, but these are the non-negotiables that you are there not to fix or change or save or renovate anyone. But to the question of, do I have to be at the table with people who I find toxic? No, but you may be called to that. That may be the prompt for you. I've got a lot of people in my life who don't like what I do. It's really awkward when you realize that your whole family, like extended family, has read your blog post when you walk into Christmas. and I've got I've got extended family who are not down with my theological and political views, and it's really cold, it's chilly. And there are some days, like I've got an aunt. Are we recording this? Oh, she won't see this. I'll just call her Aunt Rita, because that's her name. No, my aunt will post some things that I find that I abhor. And when I see her, sometimes I'm in a position of strength when I say, I can deal with Aunt Rita today. I can engage her today. I can see her today. But there are some times when I say, right now what she's saying is so toxic, or it's making something so horrible in me that I can't. So I think there are seasons to the table that we create with other people. Some of your relationships with people right now are strained, and right now they're not going to improve, but some of them are going to improve, right? So the table is optional. No one is I would never expect someone to willingly be damaged. I don't want to sacrifice marginalized people on the altar of diversity, right? I want it to be a place that you choose because you feel that you can do that. But sometimes you have to say to people like me, you go do the bigger table thing. I need to rest, right? That's okay. What else? What are you thinking? Because you know what? Humanity has never been arranged in this specific configuration in the history of the planet, right? We're never all going to be together. Let's not waste this.
So my problem, this is where Lindsay struggles, is that, I can say, you don't need to try to change or fix other people at my table, but I want to try to change and reform the people that I think are wrong. And that's where my struggle is. So when I want to invite all these people to the table, I would want to, does that make sense? Like, I'm on the other side. Like, I think that you need to work on, such and such needs to work on their theology and political ideation. So
yes.
I want to fix them. So help me.
Right.
I didn't have another word, sorry.
I don't struggle with such things. I'm a very spiritual person. No, here's the deal. Everybody thinks they're getting it right. Right now, there is a bizarro gathering across town with the opposite of me and people who believe opposite of you going, they don't get it over there, right? No one, I've told this story in the book. It's Lindsay? I'm at a conference called the Gay Christian Network, group of LGBTQ Christians and people who love and support them. And I'm across from this teenager, and we're talking about all these issues, and I'm feeling like I'm being pretty convincing, just like I was with my father, but I wasn't. And I was talking to her about it, and she said, well, look right out here, and right outside the coffee shop window was Southern Baptist sign guy. And she said, how do I love him? And I wanted to phone a friend. Like I wanted to sink into the upholstery, because I was asking a lot of her, but what I said to her was, what we have to do is look at sign guy and realize that he's doing exactly what you and I are doing right now. He's trying to hear what he believes the voice of God is and respond to that voice, because he's responding faithfully. Even though we may see how horrible that is, or how violent it is, or how discriminatory his actions are, in his mind, he doesn't get that. In his mind, it's as pure motivation as ours is. So, Lindsay, the one thing we have to do is try to say to people, they didn't show up the way they are. They have a story that led them. So some of the people that I find the most difficulty with, I have to have mercy on them, because they've been raised with an image for 40 and 50 years of a white Republican God who doesn't like gay people or black people and has a problem with women, and that is ingrained in their heads. So their voice of God, when you try to argue with someone else's God, you're going to lose for a while. So what we have to do is have mercy on people. We can oppose everything they say. We can push back against every toxic affiliation they have, but we have to remember at the end of the day, if they knew how damaging they were, they wouldn't be who they are. Having said that, we were at a gathering recently, and a woman stood up in there's Q&A time, and she goes, John, but sometimes right's just right and wrong's just wrong, and we have right on our side, and we have to go and speak for what's right. I said, you don't think they're saying that at every church? You don't think Franklin Graham is saying that? Well, that's how this works. We hold people tightly and our expectations of them loosely. That's all we can do. We can fight for a relationship with people, but ultimately, if you've had kids, you probably understand this. They're going to be who they are. What else? What else is on your mind? What are you thinking? Yes.
It's almost a daily activism. And I do have to say, I have to do a lot of self-talk to keep myself sane sometimes. I'm just feeling some days just so burnout, trying to help the marginalized people. And I do believe women are part of that group. Yeah. And working with immigrants, that's my job. That's another group. Trying to save our beautiful Boundary Waters canoe area almost every day, which is, going to be destroyed by mining. They're trying to destroy it by mining. It's just overwhelming. So I'm just trying to, when I heard you were coming here, I'm trying to come up with like a spiritual idea, maybe, why to continue doing this when it's become like another job for me.
Yes, okay. So, as I travel and I ask people why they're here, a lot of the times they say the same thing. They'll say, because I've lost hope. Or they'll say, I'm growing bitter, or I'm exhausted. Right? And sometimes I feel like I shouldn't even talk right now. We should just all take a nap, right? Because we're all so tired. And I started asking people, what kind of person does the world need? As I traveled, and people would answer me. And regardless of their theology or their politics, they'd have a lot of the same words. They'd say, well, the world needs compassionate people. The world needs generous people. The world needs truthful people, kind people. And I started writing, right? And I started writing this book called Hope and Other Superpowers. And someone said to me recently, how do you write a book about hope right now? I said, it's easy. You lie. You get up, because hope for me is not this mamby-pamby thing. Hope is not this sort of slogan. And what it is to me is this aspirational thing that pulls me out of bed and makes me walk into days I wouldn't otherwise walk into, right? When you get up in the morning, because it's exhausting to do this work, right? I'm going to talk about it tomorrow at our Compassion Fatigue seminar, but it's exhausting to give a damn, right? To wake up every day and to push back against predatory politicians and toxic systems and corrupt legislation and acts of treason and presidential tweet tantrums and leadership failures in the church and atrocities on the streets that you see every day, and it's exhausting. And so why do we keep going? I can't answer the why for you, why you should keep going. All I'm telling you is keep going. Like, I was reading Anne Frank's diary recently, and I'm going to paraphrase her. She said something like, all this is outside, all this terrible stuff, and why do I even have these ideals? Why? Hopefully one day I'll get to use them, right? And she said, I'm not going to let this situation harden me, basically. And see, we've inherited that. It's our responsibility now, while we are alive, to actually steward the hope that she had. And this is what we do. We can't afford, stopping is just not an option to me, right? There are days when I get up and I go, I'm not doing it today. And then I look and there it is. And I think if there's anything that I would tell you tonight is to realize that there is a resonance to your story, there is a power to your voice, and only you can fill that space. Only you are standing where you're standing, right? It's like a lifestyle of compassionate activism, not the work that you do with churches or nonprofits or political organizations, but how do you get up every day, and what is the world that you touch? What is the world right within your reach? You have power to do something there. And that place is not going to be, it's not going to be the same if you're not in it. But it's exhausting.
Hey there, man.
Hey.
My name is Abdi. I had one quick question, and the other one's just kind of a statement. But
sure.
The first question is you ever thought about doing stand-up comedy? And then,
well, a lot of people on one side of the aisle would tell you this is all this is. There's no theology there.
But no, I don't know. When I first came here, I was like, oh, I was like, oh man, I don't want to really be preached to, blah, blah, blah. But as you went on, I was like, wow, this guy's really cool. Like, he actually gets it. And I don't know, it's really interesting to know that, I'm Muslim and you're Christian. It's really cool to know that, like, across the table, there's somebody like you. So I kind of just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
I really appreciate
I'm
that.
grateful that you're here. Really, thank you. Really. By the way, tonight when I'm done, I'll hang out as long as you want to, and I thought you were going to say, there's a story Jesus says, and he kicks over the tables because they're selling stuff, and I had t-shirts in the lobby. I was worried. I was like, we're not going there, are we? Because I'm going to have to lose my religion on you. So, but I'll be here as long as you want tonight. I just want to leave you with a couple things. One is, I'm going to be approaching half a century on the planet in June. So when you get older, you know that your body changes, right? And my body will no longer be upside down. Let me explain this to you. I used to be able to do a flip off a diving board, and I can't anymore. And I can't remember when I stopped being able to, but I can't be upside down anymore. In fact, I used to do handstands. I cannot do them anymore unless I have a team of people helping me and paramedics standing by, right? Even like roller coasters that go upside down, I can't ride them anymore. And I used to be able to, and I don't know what happened, but my body won't be upside down anymore. And I'll be at like an amusement park or a theme park. I'll be at Disney, and I'll be looking up at a roller coaster, and I'll be with my 9 and 13-year-old, and I'll get caught up in the moment. And I'll go, well, that looks like, wow, it does look fun. Look at there's little kids on there. They're having a great time. I mean, what the heck? I wrote 2 books. I can do this. And then I get on the ride. They strap me in. It takes off. And within like 5 seconds, my brain says, I thought we talked about this. Right? You knew this was a bad idea. We tried to warn you, and now you're going to pay, right? And I get really sick. I hate being upside down. And if I'm honest, the whole world feels upside down out there. Right? Like, I've thought that so many times. I've thought the world was upside down the night of the election. I thought it the day of the inauguration, right? I thought it was upside down when I saw racists marching through Charlottesville. I thought it was upside down when our president treated those people with kid gloves, right? I saw it when I saw people fighting to ban Muslims from this country. I saw it when I thought it was upside down when I saw people being separated from their children, right? Every day it seems like something else is upside down, and I think you get it. I think you feel the disorientation. I think you feel the spiritual nausea that I feel. I think you feel estranged from friends and coworkers and family members, and I think you look at people you used to rely on for compassion and wisdom and understanding, and you don't see those things in them anymore. I think you hear the voice of preachers who represent Jesus, and they don't sound anything like Jesus to you. And I think hundreds of times a week you ask yourself, is a huge portion of this country lost their minds, or is it me? It isn't you. That is the good and the terrible news. The fact that you see how upside down this is means your faculties are intact. It means your mind is fully right. It means you still have a heart working properly. It means you still have a soul doing what a soul is supposed to do, keep you deeply human in profoundly inhumane times. I was in the parking lot of a church in Raleigh last year. We were there for a memorial service for the people killed in the Parkland shooting. And it was a memorial service, right? So we were marking people who had died prematurely. We were marking a violence that seems to be so commonplace, right? We marked an occasion that seems so like so many others. And it was a heavy day. But there was something else there. As I started walking around, I started to feel this like counterintuitive joy. Right? I started looking, teenagers had planned the event, and I'm looking at these students, and they have these t-shirts they made, and they had signs, and they were really excited to be able to do something in the face of this, right? They were really stepping into that moment, and I started to feel the presence of this sort of defiant hope in that moment. And it was a powerful ceremony. 17 middle and high school students lined the stage. Each of them spoke the name of someone who was killed. They released a dove for that person. and they lit a candle in that person's name, and then all 17 of those young people walked to the city Capitol steps, and we followed them. But what was the most powerful thing about that moment was the message was not delivered by adults. It was delivered by middle and high school students. And they spoke prophetically, and they spoke powerfully, and as they spoke, the hairs in the back of my neck stood up, right, and I started to get goosebumps, and tears came to my eyes, because I saw how much hope was happening in the face of that. And one stepped to the microphone, and he said, I just want you to know I'm happy to be here today. He said, I'm not happy because of why we're here. He said, I'm happy because I woke up today looking for hope. And he scanned the crowd, and he said, and here you are. And this is what we do. We mine hope for one another. We stand up and we live our lives in such a way that people who are losing their faith in humanity decide that it's worth it to keep going on, because there are people here who still do give a damn. If you've read A Bigger Table, I talk about being at this house, this mansion in Santa Rosa, California. My friend welcomed me. We were doing a bigger table gathering. He got me settled in my room, which had all my favorite snacks, and had books for me to read, which I was never going to read, but I was like that he did that because I was only going to be there for 2 days. And he had such great hospitality for me. And I talk about sitting in this room with this massive pane of windows overlooking the rolling countryside and the wine country, and thinking, oh, I don't deserve to be here. And yet I feel welcomed here. And I said that the view was spectacular, but the view wasn't the star. The house was spectacular, but the house wasn't the star. The star was the hospitality of my friend, who made me feel at home in a place I'd never been to before. Well, Rod lost his home in the wildfires last year. And the day he lost his home, I called him. And he said, oh, John, it was crazy. He said, I was awakened. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. We had 15 minutes. He said, we only had 15 minutes. We saved what we could. We got out of the house, and it burned to the ground. Everything we had was gone. But he said that phrase, we saved what we could. This is the phrase I want you to carry with you. You can't help every person of color see that they are loved, and to see that they need not fear, and to see that someone stands for them, but you can let some see, right? You can't let every white person understand their privilege, but you can wake some up so that they can see. You can't transform every faith community, but you can transform the one that you're in, right? You can't change every political reality, but you can affect the reality of some of the politics right where you are. You weren't here to see me tonight. Please don't let that be why you're here. You're here to realize there are like-hearted people right where you live who care about what you care about, who are asking the questions you're asking, who are outraged by what you're outraged by. See, tonight, you can talk to me for a little bit, but I want you to talk to each other. I want you to get numbers. I want you to go out for coffee, and I want you to decide what you're going to do to change this community. I want you to go out there into that world so hurting and so fractured and so desperate, and save what you can. Because I flew here from 80-degree Raleigh, North Carolina, looking for hope. And dang it, here you are. Any questions that you have before we leave tonight? Anything that you want to share? Anything that's on your mind?
Thank you. I want them to go out knowing that they are loved. But I also have to remind myself from time to time that as I'm giving them hope, I need hope back. Because otherwise I'm stuck in the place of possible death.
Yeah, hopelessness can really, once you get that dark place, it's almost impossible to get out, and you can wake up every day, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow, you can look at the day before you and feel like we've already lost it. And once we do that, we're in a really bad place. So I want to encourage you, the work that you're doing is beautiful, life-giving work. But find a reason to keep going every day. Like for me, I've got a 9-year-old daughter, 13-year-old son, and I say to myself, there's so much life inside of them that I don't want this world to damage them. So I don't want the world that they're inheriting to destroy that. And so I'm fighting for that. I think there was...
Was there someone else up here?
I just wanted to say that this lovely, dedicated woman who had discussed about kind of taking on a full-time job of doing activism, it's because of her that so many of us are knowledgeable about the environmental concerns. She makes it really easy for us to be active. She provides the information about who to call, what the bill number is. So it has so much impact. I look around this room and I see people that I've met in the last couple of years, someone back there nodding, Gail, Chris, Vicki, I mean just people that I've met, Rachel, who was sitting at the front desk. So I think that although we have been brought a lot of pain, we've seen a lot of pain, we've also seen a lot of beauty these last couple of years, and we've seen a lot of people grow. Just think about that too when you're exhausted. Tag out, take some time, but come back.
Yeah, a friend of mine said, John, there are 2 news feeds in my head. 2 news feeds in the world. He said there's one that I see every day, and it's the bad news, and it's the discord, and it's the hate. And he said, but there's another news feed. If I choose to look for it and listen for it, it's the people doing small acts of beauty every place I go. And so for some of us, it's just what are we going to dwell on a certain day? And I get it, because there's something that we can do when we're not fighting injustice all the time. We can feel guilty for it, because it can be a form of privilege, because I can go, I'm taking today off. Some people don't get to take a day off. So part of that is saying, yeah, I don't want to fully disengage and be irresponsible, but we have to make sure that we're living the lives that we're trying to defend other people allowed to live. We still have to live. We still have people that we don't want to neglect, in families and relationships. Those are beautiful things. We have to affirm those. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Oh, in the back there.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what are the day-to-day spiritual practices that you're doing to empower you to continue to do this work in a compassionate way?
Okay, this is wine, chocolate, and then whatever. We're going to dig deep into this tomorrow for the workshop, but a couple other things is I think there's this idea of engaging and withdrawing. If you're a Christian, you would understand this. There are all these stories about Jesus where they can't find Jesus. Where'd Jesus go? I don't know. This was important. We had stuff going on today. He's got a healing at 2 o'clock. But Jesus was in a solitary place praying. And I think Jesus pulled away so he could recalibrate. He could get that silence and solitude so that he didn't have contempt for people. He had compassion for them. So I need to do a lot of withdrawing because I'm engaging so much. Some of us were just engaging, right? So silence and solitude. Play is important, like creative play. I make sure that I do something that gives me joy every day, whether it's making eggplant parmesan, or whether it's playing music or something to keep the muses going, because if we don't, we will atrophy and really just become bitter. And then community is important, right? Because I can get shut in my little world where everything is terrible. And then I get into a group of people like this, like I could have had a really bad day today, and I get into a room like this, and then you go, there's something medicinal about community. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's another thing, just being with people and living, not always having to be with people just to do the work of making the world better. You had me at wine. I don't know who said that. My wife, did my wife hear that?
I'm a child of God who happens to be a Christian, who happens to be a Lutheran, pastor-type church person. And one of the things that's been resonating with me, or that's been ruminating back here, is that in the Augsburg Confession, which I'm sure you've all studied, and an article, no, never mind. But I always liked the way that Luther defined, or actually it's probably Melanchthon, wasn't it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Defined the church as simply the gathering of believers where the gospel is preached in its purity, and the sacraments are administered according to the gospel. And I just want to tell it, I mean, the same way that you say getting alone, getting that charged, it's just been really cool being around, you know. I know we need a bigger table, but there's times to just get together with you folks and go, I'm not alone, right? Mm-hmm. And the gospel is for all people. Yeah. And it's always good news. It's never not good news, and we got to hang on to that. So thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, part of what, if I, you know, what I say to people is, listen, my job is to let you know that you're not alone and you're not crazy. If you are crazy, you're in really good company. You know, look around this room and really be energized by that. Because it's a cold night, and look at where we are. And you know, what's really interesting to me is, I wonder how many people we represent in this room. In other words, how many people do you know? How many family members do you have? How many people are following you on social media? Probably hundreds of thousands of people that the ripples of our lives travel into. And if we all decided we're going to actually leverage those more and more for the cause of diversity, inequality, and love and justice, I mean, we can do a lot of work just with this room. And see, that's what this was about. This was not about you listening to some, you know, social media celebrity. This is about you deciding how you're going to alter the world out there, because this is not about having a great experience in here if it does nothing out there, right? So that's why I hope that you're here. So here's the deal. I'll be out there not selling things in a church. The t-shirts that you see out there, by the way, my wife and I designed them, and we use them. They call those our health insurance shirts. We pay our health care with things like that. Not to make you feel bad. I got this thing right here. Okay, so I'm grateful for your presence, really. The reason I do this is to be with you in nights like this so that we can decide that we're going to make things different in the world. And whether you came here voluntarily or you were coerced to be here, I hope that it was worth your time and your energy and your presence. So all you have left to do now, your homework is to go save what you can. So thank you. No, I'm sorry, we're done.
I wanted to hear what you had to say, what everybody else had to say, and I feel that I have to share my perspective because of based on my experience working with abused children, more specifically adults who were abused as children.
Okay.
And when I hear the orange one speak, I hear the voice of a child. For an adult who wasn't traumatized or who has been supported, loved, cared for, healed, we hear the voice of a child from an adult. Yeah. And that's a caricature of an adult when you really think about it. Yeah. But through the ears of a traumatized child who is now an adult and is 40, 50, 60, 70 years unhealed, they hear the cries of a child. So my take home, and in processing a lot of the words, the lovely words that you've used to describe our situation and how it feels like the world is upside down, as I've studied the world over the past centuries, it has occurred to me that the world has always been upside down for children. Children are to be seen, not heard. Children are property of their parents, of the church. They're slaves. And in historical teachings, it's written in Hebrew from 12,000 years ago that slavery is an accepted thing and children are slaves. So to me now, when I hear the orange one speak with the voice of a child, I hear the cautionary tale of what it means to harm any child. Because we all know, I think we can agree, that he was harmed. And if he was the only one, it wouldn't be an issue. But he's not. He's appealing to people who still live in fear and wounds, deep wounds in their souls. And they just want to be invited to the table and become the adult that they were born to be, but didn't really get the opportunity because somebody damaged their soul or didn't even bring it to life. So to me, this is an exciting time. I love being alive right now. I love watching the toxin come to the surface, because if we don't breathe the toxin out, we can't let the peace in. There's no space for it. We have to let that toxin flow. So when, and a lot of this has just come because I'm a physician, and many of my patients voted opposite of me. I knew their story. So I started listening to what they heard, and they hear the voice of a crying child. And it's our adult responsibility to heal and help and care and provide safety at our table.
So what time were we gathering tomorrow?
So tomorrow from 9 to 11.
9 to 11. You can sleep in 9:01. We'll be here talking about fighting compassion fatigue. We'll talk about digging into practices to hopefully lighten the load for you. And you are beautiful people. I'm grateful for you. So have a lovely evening. Okay.